Going to call this committee to order.
You're now live.
We are live. This is the Senate Finance on Wednesday, April 21st. And we are going to start with H 437, which is an act relating to changes that affect the revenues of the state. And Commissioner Bolio, I apologize, we got off the floor late. The floor is yours, and I understand Will Baker may be with you, but I see his name, so I assume he's around somewhere, but the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe Will is with me. I'll start with a question, though. Do you want me to talk about all three elements of the bill or just the surcharge today?
Whatever you would like to talk about.
Okay.
Obviously, we're running out of time, so these bills have got to come out.
Yeah. So Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner, I'll talk briefly about all three parts then. I suspect it will come as no surprise to the committee that the governor doesn't support the surcharge that's currently in this bill. The governor does support the other two elements of the bill, which is the manufactured inputs exemption. That's an existing sales tax exemption. This is a slight expansion of it that the tax department proposed. And the manufactured home low-income housing credit, which I think we talked about before in relation to the budget, but helps provide down payment assistance to low-income Vermonters to get new energy-efficient mobile homes. I don't believe the administration sees the need for the offset in this bill, and I actually think that putting the surcharge in as an offset is a little incoherent in this bill for a couple of reasons. One, as I look at the fiscal note, it raises more money than these other programs cost. But I would also note for the committee, as members will be well aware, that the manufacturing inputs exemption is a sales tax exemption, which means it's the education fund. And this surcharge for property transfer tax would be going to the general fund. So it's not actually functioning as an offset. We don't believe with the state of the education fund that you necessarily need to offset that revenue in order to pass the manufactured inputs exemption, which we believe is good policy. On the inputs exemption, this is one that is challenging to administer. We have what's known as the direct use standard right now, which means that the manufacturing elements of the manufacturing process are not necessarily exempt from sales tax unless they directly alter the raw materials. Many states have what is known as the integrated plant theory, which means that things that are integral to the manufacturing process are exempt. And being in the direct use standard can create some odd situations that Will can really jump into with a lot of background. But you might have cutting wood to make anything, where the saw might be exempt, but then you've got a vacuum to suck up the sawdust, and that wouldn't be exempt. But again, as a manufacturer, you're going to think that that is part of your manufacturing process. And in fact, the department has lost cases in court where we believe we're following the letter of the law and what the requirement to administer the law under the direct use standard calls for, where courts have disagreed. And so there are a lot of times where audits on this front seem like they're coming out of left field for businesses, where businesses really feel like they're doing the right thing, trying to follow the rules and get hit with a tax bill on this. And then we have the expenses of litigating that, the bad optics of litigating that, and in fact, the possibility of losing when we get to Superior and Supreme Court. So that was the basis for proposing that. And again, we'd be happy to, that's a really technical subject that I'm really happy to have Will here for, and can jump into details and speak readily about that. The manufactured home credits is one that is not necessarily directly administered by the tax department. We do administer the credits themselves, which are administered through VHFA, and then mostly purchased by banks and insurance companies to take as credits against their either corporate income tax, bank franchise tax, insurance premium tax. and that's a modest increase in the first year of 250,000. Though I would note they're 5-year credits, so the first year of that is a $250,000 investment, but that carries forward for 5 years, which means in year 2 it's 500,000, year 3 750, up to a perpetuity of 1.25 million. But even under that, I just don't think that the offsets are the right place to do that. So I'm happy to jump into any details on the manufacturing inputs exemption. I can try to talk with more detail on the manufactured homes, that I think folks are familiar with this, or answer any questions on the surcharge.
Okay. We did get some numbers and specifics on the manufactured homes. I think Will can help us on the manufacturing. I remember we had to do something with packaging.
That's right.
Packaging has been an issue. Remember the issue of a conveyor belt, and whether or not it was attached to the machine or not attached to the machine that was altering the product. So, committee, any questions for Commissioner Bolio? Senator McDonald. Okay. I got Senator McDonald. I've got Hardy Sirotkin.
Commissioner, I've always been impressed with your coming in ahead of time and helping us understand problems that are forthcoming before we have to deal with them, and that goes for your predecessor also. We've been dealing with taxes on machinery and equipment for decades, and we eliminated the biggest tax of all, which was the machinery and equipment tax. It was a property tax, and we did that to make things simpler and to promote businesses and to create equality. We've had the problem of pieces of equipment performing more than one task, and you have the problem of the courts making rulings that are difficult to predict. Would it not be? Oh, and I wanted to ask whether, if it was correct that the very businesses that are buying these are now permitted to depreciate them over a shorter period of time than used to be depreciable, since the federal bill that passed 2 years ago. Is that correct, that they could be depreciated more quickly?
Will, have we linked up to that? Do you have any information on that, if that flows through to Vermont?
Yes, I believe that's right. I'm Will Baker, legal director for the tax department. There were some rules in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 that do allow businesses to accelerate depreciation for these sorts of things at the federal level, but that bonus depreciation is not allowed for their Vermont tax. So they do get a break, so to speak, federally with federal tax, not necessarily for Vermont tax.
So, Madam Chair, we're being asked to make things simpler and less complex, or to once again provide a business benefit regarding their machinery and equipment. And perhaps we could choose to simply say, if they're purchased and they're attached, you pay sales tax on them like any other product. They can depreciate them at the federal level. They still don't have to pay a machinery and equipment tax. But it seems that all the requests we get are to tax them less. At the same time that the same administration comes in with a pretty
Senator, you're getting into an editorial comment, which is
comes in
question?
and well, you've slowed me down in trying to remember.
Okay.
So what could we do to have you not lose court cases, and what would simplify this, and so in a way that we could avoid constantly giving tax relief to businesses at the same time we can't raise taxes to fill the holes created?
One comment I'd make to that, Senator, is as we did our analysis to try to figure out what the cost, so to speak, of this exemption expansion would be, we learned that almost all, I can't say all, but almost all of the use tax paid on these machines comes either directly from audits that we conduct or formerly audited businesses, which is to say that I also feel there's an equity issue here in that, taxes are supposed to be a voluntary system. And if the only way that we're getting that revenue is through direct audits, we're not in a good spot. And my philosophy has always been, what can we do to encourage voluntary compliance? How can we stand up the systems that allow people to have a fighting chance to know what they're supposed to do, right? So I think you've proposed one path of that would be, you rip the exemption out wholesale and you just tax it all. I think the other path would be that we put in this change in the standard to be more in line with other states. And in fact, I think Will can very well correct me if I'm incorrect on this, but I also think that the legal research and legal philosophy has been moving towards the direction of integrated plant theory, which would mean we'd be following the trend of other states. So I don't know if taking the machinery exemption out would be following the trend around the country, but I do think this small expansion would be. And I want to be clear, this is not a dramatic expansion of the goalposts of what this exemption would provide. It's really, I think, a modest increase to, or a modest expansion to try to reach that simplicity, both for taxpayer and for the department. And that will provide opportunities for us to close the tax gap in other ways, right? We won't have to spend the time doing the audits with the same level of challenges, both that the business sees and the department sees. We won't have to spend the time litigating that. There's opportunity costs for it, for sure.
So, Madam Chair, I'm reporting on the commissioner's confirmation. His strength has been to make things work more smoothly, and he's come up through the system, and we have been long. It's very welcome.
I appreciate that.
So, Madam Chair, all the changes that we make seem to be headed in one direction and not the other, and so that's where we are, and that's my concern. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, we're about to lose Commissioner Bolio. I've got Senator Hardy and Senator Sirotkin. And Senator Pearson, have I seen your hand? Okay, so we're going to need to move this along because he's got 1 minute.
I'm happy to take these questions, Senator, and then I'm also happy to come back whenever. I realize this is a very in the weeds topic, so I don't want to just cut it short with 15 minutes and leave you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Commissioner Bolio. Thank you for being here. Strangely, my question is sort of similar to Senator McDonald's, in that Senator Pearson will remember last year or for two running years, we did this thing in agriculture for logging equipment. And each year it was like this little tiny piece. Like this year it was the tires and the next year it was the chains or something. I can't remember the details, but and we exempted them from taxation in a similar way to this. And so I'm wondering, as this is worded, there are some manufacturers that change materials, and in the process of changing those materials, the equipment that is used would not be taxed. But then there are other different kinds of businesses, namely like bakers and restaurants and things, that would not get that exemption. So I'm just wondering, are we going to have this again next year, where there's sort of the next group or the next item or the next type of business? And I guess my question is similar, like, where do we draw the lines, and what do you recommend as tax commissioner on where to draw the lines?
Wow, that's a big question. Let me try to
come back with that answer if you want.
Are you I think you're asking more generally in the economy, not necessarily in manufacturing, or
well, in manufacturing, in that this creates an exemption, but also draws the line in a place. And is this the right place to draw the line? And so if you want to think about it more, that's fine. it gets frustrating to then, come in next year and say, well, actually, we want the tires and the chains and the, the whatever on the truck and that's what we experienced in the Ag Committee. You might remember that. And it seems like this could set us up to do that again. So,
Yeah, so let me try to take it.
has.
Yeah, let me try to take a stab at that. I might ask Will to provide some thoughts here as well, because we've thought about this sort of, okay, so it moves away from a gray area. The next question is, well, what's the next gray area, right? I think that's what you're asking. And with an exemption, there's always going to be an endpoint to that exemption, right? And anything on this side of it is taxable and anything on this side of it isn't taxable. And it's around those fringes that you tend to scuffle, right? I would say a few things. As we were developing this proposal, we tried to be thoughtful about that, right? To find the balance of where can we add clarity here without making it so that everything that even remotely seems like manufacturing is automatically exempt, right? How do we make sure that this doesn't, dramatically overcorrect, so to speak? So, I can't say there's no more gray area as you move an exemption, unless you say everything is taxed or everything is exempt, right? But the universe for that is simply too large and oftentimes impossible to administer. So I think on this particular proposal, I would say as we were developing it, we were thoughtful about that. We did research as to how other states handle these exemptions. Again, this is something Will can speak to more readily, but as you might imagine, with sales tax and the complexity of something like manufacturing, there's not a bunch of buckets where everybody falls into. It's a spectrum where everybody has carved out different exemptions and different definitions through a history of legislative action, through a history of litigation, through a history of regulation. So it's difficult to be able to have pure consistency between the states, but we did try to look at what other states were doing, make sure that we were going to be in line with them, make sure that we were not overcorrecting for Vermont, and trying to be reasonable with this request. Does that answer your question, Senator?
Yeah, it does. In also in part because I had you confirm that it was your proposal and the House just basically took in the proposal that was proposed in the governor's budget. Is that correct, more or less?
I would say some minor changes were made. I might ask Will to speak to those.
So the lines as they're drawn in this proposal were the lines that you drew, basically.
Yeah, I would say yes. Will, is that a fair answer?
Yeah, they made a couple changes to the energy portion and they took out a reference to coal, I believe. Otherwise, it's very similar.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Senator Sirotkin, then Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you
It's hard to
answered
hear
part-
you, Senator. Can you get
can't-
closer to your mic?
Hold on. Is that better?
That's better.
I can hear you, Senator.
So you answered part of the question. This was the manufacturing credit was proposed by the administration and I assume was taken into account in the revenue forecasts that have been dealing with in Ways and Means. And I guess we may hear from joint fiscal on that. So is that is that a reason why you feel the offset is not necessary?
Well, yeah, Senator, so this is Ed Fund, right? So it's not necessarily part of like the fiscal year 22 budget that we're talking about, but I think the administration's position is the offset isn't necessary because the Ed Fund is running a significant surplus. It's very similar to the discussion I think this committee had on the original bill for S53, right? And the period products exemption not needing an offset because the status of the Ed Fund is so healthy at this point.
But there's a new credit for manufactured homes that is.
Oh, yeah. So that's general fund, but that was accounted for in the governor's original budget. Yes.
It was? This is a proposal that came from the governor to do the credit for the manufactured homes?
It was.
Okay. So the governor also had a proposal to do a tax credit for an increase for downtowns for 1.75 million. And my understanding is that that's running into problems, and I'm being told that we have to find an offsetting uh, increase in revenues. So you're saying that the increased revenues here on the mansion tax, call it that, or homes over $1 million or commercial property, that money may be available for downtown tax credits because it's not being used here?
Well, I mean, in this bill, the House said it was being used to offset these credits, but in the governor's originally proposed budget, certainly he didn't propose this surcharge to offset either the downtown credit or the manufactured home credit. I would caution calling it the mansion tax because I believe the split on properties that are hit is
It was just
three-quarters commercial and only 25% residential.
I
I
take it.
believe there have been other
I take it back.
claims on that surcharge.
I take it back. I will never refer to it as a mansion tax.
Okay.
So the only final question I have, and I hope you can get back to me soon, because I did have a conversation with you months ago, and also with Adam Gresham, and also I think with Joint Fiscal. I have never gotten an answer to the savings we are likely to incur in the renter rebate program, given the millions upon millions of rent money that we're getting from the federal government now. So people are going to be relieved of so much rent under the federal program that it has to affect our renter rebate. And I want to know whether or not that money is now changing the revenue projections or the outflow of revenues from the tax department.
Yeah, I remember that question, Senator. I apologize that we haven't followed up on that. I thought we had done some work there, so I will take that offline and make sure that we get back to you. Our interpretation, well, I guess I should be cautious and make sure that as I'm pulling this from my memory, I'm speaking correctly, so I may have to correct myself. But our interpretation is that federal offset would be considered not rent paid by the renter. So I think you're right that there may be some savings there. For Tax Year 21, you'll remember we changed the structure so that it's not necessarily allocable rent. It's fair market rent, but it also is subtracted for subsidies. So again, our interpretation is that those
Okay. I think we're getting off the topic at hand, which is not the downtown tax credit.
Apologies, Madam Chair.
No, it's not you, Commissioner.
My fault.
I'm trying to be respectful of your
Right.
time and keep us
Right.
focused
Right.
on the issue before us, which is H 437.
I'll make sure to get back to you on that, Senator.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Sorokin, do you have any other questions?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. My questions got covered.
Okay, so thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you all. I'm sure I don't, to the extent it pleases the committee, I'm sure Will would be happy to stay and chat about the technical aspects of this as he sees. But again, I'll leave that up to you folks to determine if you want to hear that today. Thank you all for the time.
Thank you. Committee, do we have any questions for Will at this point? The more technical, Senator McDonald? You're muted, Senator.
Could we be refreshed on the basics of the manufactured home changes proposed?
I don't know that that's in his ballywick.
Yes, the manufactured home proposal was not something that I worked on, so I cannot speak to that program.
Thank
That's
you.
a VHFA.
Okay, someone else will perhaps do it later. Thank you.
Yeah, and we had some pretty detailed testimony on that when we took this up last time.
I know we did.
Okay. All right, so if you can help us figure out what questions you need, we'll get the right witness back in.
Which is
Okay, which would
maybe
probably
a
be
committee member could
tomorrow.
help me out later. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I've got Abby next, but Abby, am I right? You're going to walk us through the bill?
It's whatever the committee would like, Madam Chair. I would be happy to walk you through it.
I'm thinking I've got two more witnesses.
I can wait.
Are you here because you have a time constraint, or can you wait and let us get through the last two witnesses?
Yes. I'll
Okay,
wait.
and then we can take a look at it. All right, so we're going to go to Peter Tucker.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. Peter Tucker for the Vermont Association of Realtors. Joining me today is Ray Alt, a commercial realtor and owner of Alt Commercial Realty. And we appreciate the committee recognizing how important this issue is to our clients and customers and giving us the opportunity to comment. Vermont Association of Realtors is a trade association of over 1,800 members who work on behalf of property owners every day. Our mission is to encourage home ownership and protect the interests of our clients, the purchasers and sellers of real property in Vermont. It is our responsibility to oppose the surcharge to the property transfer tax proposed in H 437. The bill, as has been discussed, can be broken into three components for consideration. The bulk of the bill addresses this manufacturing machinery and equipment sales tax exemption. And I appreciate the testimony from the tax department because it was not clear to me, exactly what this accomplished. But in reality, it is difficult to understand its connection to real estate. There's simply no nexus to real estate. We want to spend most of our time addressing the revenue side of this bill. The property transfer tax came about to support the Vermont Housing Conservation Board in efforts to support affordable housing. Every year, realtors facilitate thousands of transactions that provide funding for these endeavors. And as you know, the property transfer tax revenue has grown significantly as our industry has been an economic leader throughout the pandemic, and that is anticipated to continue in 2021. Property transfer tax on properties that we are discussing is currently 1.45%. This includes a 0.2% clean water surcharge. This proposal adds another 0.5% surcharge on the value of properties over $1 million, making that total tax 1.95%. I did.
Okay, Peter, the surcharge is only on that above $1 million.
That's
It's
correct.
not on the whole price.
That's
Okay,
correct.
so
Yep. Good. So I did want to, and can I screen share, Faith? Is that-
Faith May gives you permission.
Right,
You
we had
can-
discussed it.
Yes, you can screen share.
Okay, now I gotta find it though. This is a challenge. Oh, it's here. Shoot. Actually, I may not be able to screen share. I'm sorry. So I'm going to give up
I'm
on
happy
that.
to pull that up for you. You just
Okay,
give me a minute.
great. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it. Can I X? There we go. So in initial discussions in the Ways and Means Committee, there was a fiscal note provided that breaks down the revenue side of this property transfer tax, and that's really what we wanted to be able to address. It shows revenue being produced in three different areas: commercial properties, non-homestead residential properties, and residential properties. And the fiscal note just kind of shows, and Faith, could you just scroll to the bottom? Thank you. Yeah, so this chart is what we wanted to refer to. And as you can see, the revenue, just look at FY22 revenue for commercial properties and farms, second homes and condos, and then residential properties. So that's the breakdown that has been proposed as the revenue source for this particular transfer tax. And just one additional note, the property transfer tax shown here is 1.75% on values over 1 million. I know when a buyer sits at a closing, although they're virtual now, the actual total tax because of the clean water surcharge is 1.95% on that value over $1 million, certainly. So with that said, I actually think that it would be appropriate to, to stop the screen share. And I'd like to turn this over to Ray Alt, who is a experienced commercial broker and a longtime member of our Government Affairs Committee.
Okay, and Ray, welcome. I asked to have someone talk to us about commercial real estate because I'm a retired realtor. $1 million, I wish I could have sold one. Never did, but I'm not sure that $1 million in the commercial market is the mansion tax, whoever referred to that is a particularly high-end transfer or price. And I thought I'd let, just wanted to hear from these two very different markets.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and the committee. I will seek to address that in one of my sections of my remarks. Again, my name is Ray Alt, and I'm a commercial realtor based in Rutland. My company is Alt Commercial Realty, and I've been a commercial specialist since 1981. 40 of my 47 years as a Vermont licensed real estate broker. While I sell and lease commercial and industrial properties statewide, most of my business is concentrated in Rutland, Addison, Windsor, and Bennington counties. So my comments largely reflect knowledge of brokerage activity across rural Vermont outside of Chittenden County. The dramatic increase in residential property sales and sale prices throughout Vermont since last summer has not translated to similar increases in commercial and industrial sales and sales prices or lease rates, except perhaps to some degree in Chittenden County, as I'm told by my fellow commercial specialists there. However, regardless of geography in Vermont, the proposed increase in property transfer tax is, I'm sorry. The increase in the property transfer tax proposal for sale price amounts above 1 million as Vermont is emerging from the pandemic is wrong-headed on 3 counts. First, the major share of revenue in this proposal comes from commercial transactions, and it hits business property users, user buyers, and investors, while the market is just beginning to recover. Taxing that nascent optimism, which drives price increases at a point where Vermont's commercial real estate economy has not recovered more than halfway back from the start of the Great Recession, will have a dampening effect on interest from such user buyers and investors. That includes many medium-sized Vermont businesses seeking to grow their revenue and jobs, moving up to larger buildings or to acquire larger sites on which to build. Also, for Vermont's commercial property to recover, there needs to be significant reinvestment or new investment in distressed properties or businesses. Second, businesses that expand and invest in Vermont add to the tax base through expanded corporate tax, property taxes, sales and use tax, rooms and meals tax, income taxes, and expanded employment taxes. In fact, I cannot think of a commercial or industrial sale transaction where significant renovation or fit up for a change of use or expanded use was not envisioned. Throwing cold water on such expansions has a depressing effect. Third, the proposed property transfer tax surcharge sends the message to mid-sized and larger businesses that consider relocating to Vermont or adding a Vermont location in a multi-location business that our state is playing whack-a-mole with those that rise above the average performers. It is wrong to assume that out-of-state businesses don't pay attention to such details as the tax cost of buying a multi-million-dollar office or retail or building or factory. Vermont already presents extra hurdles to such businesses with well-earned reputation for lengthier and costlier permitting processes. So if I may, on the point or the question you were asking, Madam Chair, there are many Vermont commercial sales, fewer industrial sales, that don't rise to the level of $1 million. In fact, many of your restaurants are in small standalone buildings. Many of your office buildings are small standalone office buildings, not usually not rising much above $500,000 or $700,000. But many of the office buildings and retail stores and manufacturing facilities of mid-sized and larger businesses do. I have just placed under contract a 17,000 square foot office building, which is considered probably a mid to large size office building in rural Vermont. It's probably a smaller building in Chittenden County, but that sale price is 1.8 million. And I think that it doesn't take a whole lot more these days to get above $1 million in the mid-sized business category. So the commercial realtors of Vermont urge this committee to strike the property transfer tax surcharge from a bill that otherwise has laudatory provisions for manufactured housing tax credit and the expansion of the manufacturing inputs exemption. It's our belief that the existing property transfer tax, together with increased recovery revenue from other taxes I mentioned, will readily fund those desirable provisions through slowly increasing sales activity and sale prices, hopefully returning to pre-2008 levels and beyond. And I know that Rutland and other communities have not come back more than halfway from the before the Great Recession. Be glad to take any questions from the committee, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Tucker, did you have anything else to add? You're muted, Peter. It's my mantra, you're muted.
Right. I hear that. Yeah, I did want to take a quick look at the other revenue generating categories. First is non-homestead properties. And, when I'm not going to use the term, but when you're talking about properties, and magnificent or significant homes, these are the homes that you think of. They're typically second homes in resort communities. That's where I spent 25 years selling real estate, so I'm super familiar with it. The purchasers that purchase these homes have money. They generally are from out of state, and they're able to pay. This is what you think of when we're talking about McMansions or properties over $1 million. What we see as realtors are families that are so attracted to Vermont and the natural resources here that they decide to make an investment here. In addition to the transfer tax of 1.45, they pay significant non-homestead property taxes and utilize relatively little services. But more importantly, these property owners are tremendous contributors to our economy. They contract for a variety of services to maintain and manage and improve their properties. They purchase goods and services whenever they're here. An interesting comment came up at our last government affairs meeting. One realtor pointed out that second homeowners are committed to the local restaurants in their communities. They have their favorite restaurants, they talk about them, they love them, and they use them. For many hard-hit industries like the ski areas, restaurants, and bars, their chance for survival will depend on support of the Second Home Committee going forward as we recover from the pandemic. And the last portion of revenue generated is from residential sales. That's around 6% of the projections. Consider a buyer who has the ability to purchase $1 million home. They're moving here, they're making a major investment in the state. And they're going to pay property taxes, but more importantly, they're going to expand the income tax base of the state. And this is a better way to build tax revenues for the state. Transfer taxes have a tendency to be considered by buyers and can discourage them from coming here and instead have them choose other states. The third component of the bill is the affordable housing tax credit that VHFA and others have used so effectively to provide assistance for affordable housing. This was the original intent of the property transfer tax, and we support those tax credits. As a result of increasing revenue being generated by the property transfer tax, these credits can be paid out of the existing property transfer tax. No additional surcharges are required. Now is not the time to increase taxes, especially on commercial transactions, just as our economy is recovering from a year-long pandemic. And we need real estate to continue to be a positive contributor to the economy. Think about commercial transfers in excess of $1 million. You know, as Ray alluded to, a smart business owner will expand their business in Vermont and add to the taxes in many ways. More importantly, they hopefully bring more jobs, more employment, and the additional tax revenue that employment creates. Of greater importance, we need substantial reinvestment in commercial businesses that have struggled in the pandemic. Many, especially in the tourism economy, will need new investment as the economy recovers. We encourage investment in Vermont. We increase the revenues of the state, not by increasing the tax rate, as this bill proposes, but by building a broader tax base that will return outsized dividends in major tax categories like corporate, property, and income. Property transfer tax is a perfect example of a thriving business and what it does to contribute to state tax revenues. As our productivity increased during the pandemic, our contribution to tax revenues has grown significantly. Encourage investment, expand the tax base, and generate more tax revenues for the state. So our request to the committee today is to be fair. Be fair to purchasers who are making a sizable investment in the fabric of Vermont. Instead of discouraging investment, we need to find ways to encourage investment that helps build our Vermont economy in a way that is thoughtful to the environment and provides resources that the state needs to function. And Ray and I are happy to answer questions. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the committee for your time.
Okay, thank you. Committee questions? No. All right, Senator Hardy. And then Senator McDonald.
I was going to yield, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Alt, and I was wondering, you know, I think we've seen evidence pretty clearly during the pandemic of more and more people coming into Vermont and buying homes, second homes, and the real estate market in some communities around the state has been exploding. However, I'm wondering in the commercial property area, I've heard some anecdotal information about actually fewer office buildings being sold or purchased nationwide, not specific to Vermont, because more and more companies are saying, oh, we don't need office space now that everybody's going to work from home. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing that in Vermont and the sort of the differences you're seeing between commercial and residential property transfers.
Yes, Senator Hardy, that is happening. And of course, as you can imagine, the office sector has been most heavily hit. However, a combination of factors that have been long developing have increased the demand for office space for medical uses, and certain others that escape my mind right now. There's several that are doing much better than they had before. But clearly, we're hoping that with the passing of the pandemic, we'll return largely in other segments to normal. Now, the normal for retail included a slide toward the big box purchases and the online purchases and away from the mom and pop retail stores. But thankfully, the sector that Peter Tucker worked with for most of his 25 years in this industry, the visitors to the state prefer to visit a lot of these smaller boutiques. And I think they will continue to thrive. But how many of those rise above $1 million in sale price? Not too many of the small shops, which I'm glad we have. Because my very first sale was actually commercial sale in real estate, was in Addison County. It was the Bakery Lane Soup Bowl. And Marge and Joan published a Bakery Lane Soup Bowl cookbook that my wife cooked from for many decades, even after Marge and Joan moved to Arizona. But it's those small businesses that are the essence, I think, of Vermont. But we migrate towards some of the larger business properties for retail and for industrial use. I've sold the same industrial building in Rutland 3 times now. And actually the highest sale price was the first sale price back in the late 1990s. And the most recent sale price was the second highest price, but in between things dipped during the Great Recession. And so I have watched in real time buildings that, well, they were constantly upgraded. For example, there was electric power added to the roof of the factory that I was talking about, but they didn't sell for any higher price than the first time around.
Right. So that's what I was trying to get at, was whether the boom we're seeing in the residential market is actually not the same as what we're seeing in the commercial property. And it sounds like
Not the same. We're only
sounds like-
halfway back.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And is the Bakery Lane, is that now the Arcadian restaurant? Is it that property?
I believe so. It's down
Yes.
along the river. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. With the deck on the river. It's a very nice place to eat.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Alt.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, these hearings don't become sort of repetitive over the years. And one of the, Mr. Tucker was saying that this was not a good time to raise taxes. And I'm trying to recall the last time any one of the witnesses we've had in the last week has stepped up and said this was a good time to raise taxes. Mr. Tucker, what would be a good time to raise taxes?
Well, I think that it's not so much when is the time to raise taxes, it's how you go about raising them. And, our thinking on this is that by expanding, the business community in the state of Vermont, they broaden the tax base through increased revenue in corporate sales tax, sales and use tax, things of that nature, and also income tax. So it isn't a matter of when, it's a matter of how.
So there is no good time to raise taxes, is what you're saying?
Sure, yes.
Well,
yeah.
It's not American to like taxes.
Thank you. Now we know what we're dealing with. Yeah.
Okay. Senator, when was
You're
the
not alone,
last
Mr.
time you heard someone say, increase my taxes? I've heard a lot of increase somebody else's taxes.
Early during the recession of 1990, we had the business community come in and ask us to raise taxes.
There were some members that did, yes.
Yep.
Senator Bray.
Hi. So, Mr. Tucker, Mr. Alt, thanks for coming in. And I just want to offer a perspective from my work in another committee, Natural Resources and Energy. And that is that when people lament the regulations, the permits, I think of this as an investment that everyone prior to someone moving to Vermont now has made for decades to create the clean air, the clean water, the relative safety, all the attributes that make it an attractive place to come now. So, although there is a price of admission, right, as you pay a property transfer tax, I think it's a modest investment compared to what others have already paid to create the attractive features that draw people here now. So I know no one wants to pay taxes or a surcharge, but I think of it as a good investment that is returned many times over. So I'm just offering that as an alternative.
Okay. Have we got any final questions? Because we're now over time. Okay, Senator Pearson.
Just a quick one. I'm curious if your analysis of the recovery in the commercial real estate and has taken into account the looming cannabis marketplace. The reason I ask is news reports out of Colorado were quite stark as that marketplace began, and I remember headlines that it was impossible to find warehouse space, for example. And I just wonder how if that's a factor at all as you look in the year to come, and if that's something you think is appropriate for us to notice as we make these policy decisions.
Yes, Senator Pearson, it is, and that's an ongoing development. The marijuana/hemp investment that was coming on very strong in 2019, I would say. I sold a tomato hydroponic farm to a hemp grower, and that was, I think, at the peak of the demand for hemp. Marijuana, a different equation, as you know better than I, is the formulas have allowed, I should say the passage of statutes have allowed recreational marijuana use. And if we take the same route that Washington and Colorado did, I think we'd rather learn by their experiences. And I do know, case in point, the large, majestic marble headquarters for Vermont Marble Company was purchased by a group who foresaw serving many strata of the coming industry of hemp and marijuana. And that building was purchased at auction, even though it had been appraised at over $2 million. It sold for its relative tax bill at auction for $35,000. And that party has abandoned the hemp and marijuana formula for tenancies and is exploring others and hoping that they can make it worth back something up over $1 million. And certainly a property like that, of that size, 30,000 square feet, and very well appointed with a fairly new elevator in it, should be able to command much more than $1 million. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, we aren't seeing a boom at this point. All right, so committee, unless we have other questions, Abby is here and Graham is here. And Abby, why don't you walk us through this? We have the next thing on the agenda is 360, which is broadband, and that's a committee discussion. I have a hard stop at 4, but you can go on without me. Abby, so I'm looking to see if this is here. Is the bill up? No, it isn't.
I'll post it now.
Okay.
So Madam Chair, I did do a walkthrough for the committee, but I could give you a quick overview of the sections unless you'd like me to.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just kind of walk us through section 1 and then do committee discussion and see where we are in each one of those. And Graham, if you have any kind of fiscal report on each section, that would be helpful. Okay, let me see if I can update.
Great. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel. The bill does have the 3 main provisions that you've discussed today. There's the property transfer tax surcharge in the first, sorry, just pulling up my notes again. In the first 3 sections, section 4 has the expansion of the sales and use tax exemption for manufacturing equipment and machinery. And the 5th section increases the appropriation for the affordable housing tax credit dedicated to manufactured homes.
Okay.
All of the provisions are effective in the version as passed the House on July 1st, 2021.
And was the surcharge meant to offset the revenues lost by the manufacturing exemption? Was that was stated today? Does anyone know?
As I believe the Commissioner of Taxes did point out, the sales and use tax exemption would impact the education fund, whereas all of the revenue from the property transfer tax surcharge is dedicated explicitly to the general fund. So it sort of skimmed off the top, which was done explicitly to avoid the statutory and also budgetary language that's typically passed that splits property transfer tax revenues to a couple of different funds, both to the Housing and Conservation Board and also to municipal regional planning funds. So the way that the bill is drafted, all of this surcharge would go directly to the general fund. The affordable housing tax credit is a general fund expense.
Okay. So this is offsetting the affordable housing tax credit? It would be more than that.
It is more than that, and I see Graham has popped up. I think he might.
Graham, can you help us?
Yeah, I can. I'm Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. You're right. The property transfer tax surcharge raises more money than the manufactured homes credit does. So the two general fund pieces. But as Commissioner Bolio noted, the manufactured homes credit over by the 5th year is an ongoing revenue loss of 1.25 million. So just be aware that, looking at the fiscal note in the first year, it looks like we're raising an additional $1.75 million more than we need to. When by the end of the phase in for the manufactured housing credit and by 2025, based upon the forecast for the property transfer tax, those two will be relatively close, probably within $250,000 of each other.
So this was offsetting the additional tax credits or loss of revenue, because these are bought by banks and insurance companies. So it's a credit for them. And the property transfer tax would offset that loss, assuming that people would buy or upgrade. And I believe a lot of it was upgrade to more energy efficient mobile homes, if it weren't for the tax credit. But it was not meant to offset the manufacturing tax credit, or I don't know if we want to call it further exemption or clarification of the manufacturing equipment, and that's a sales tax. And that, do we have a fiscal note on what the impact to the ed fund would be on that one?
We do, and I think Faith just posted my fiscal note to the website. It's a decrease in revenue of about $900,000 per year in the education fund.
900,000. Okay. Well, I guess I gotta see if that'll upgrade again. Yep, you appeared. Okay. 2.102 and 1.9. So the property transfer tax surcharge is estimated to go down over 3 years?
That's correct. And that generally just follows the forecast for the property transfer tax. The property transfer tax is expected to sort of peak next year and then slowly start to come back down. That's the consensus forecast at the moment. So that's why you see sort of a small decline.
As long as it's slowly, not like the last one. Okay. And the manufacturer home credit would increase because that's over 5 years. That levels out though, right after 5 years?
After 5 years, it levels out at a cost of $1.25 million. So you don't see that in the chart in the fiscal note, but by fiscal year 26, it would be 1.25 million to the negative. So you're talking $600,000 once everything's phased in. I don't know what the fiscal revenue raised for the property transfer taxes in fiscal 26, but they sort of come close to each other because the property transfer tax is scheduled or forecasted to not decrease, but come down from its peak, while the manufactured home credit is projected to increase.
Madam Chair,
Is that Senator McDonald?
was the current current 38% increase in home sales predicted?
That is built into the forecast, yes.
No, that wasn't my question. Was that predicted that this year would have a 38% increase in home sales?
By whom?
Out of staters.
No, by who would do the predicting?
Well, we're being told that the property transfer tax on homes is going to decline in the next couple of years. And I say, based on what?
Oh, I can tell you that.
Okay.
It will be in your economic report. The housing market peaks and then it goes down and then it peaks. And it pretty much mirrors the economic cycle.
Okay.
But it's history.
The 38% increase on out-of-state expensive property wasn't predicted, but it's predicted.
Why don't you check with the last economic thing? It's been going up. And it's been going up for years since the dive.
Okay, I just
I don't know if 38% was forecast, but it's been increasing.
Yeah.
And it's in our revenue forecast.
It's in the revenue.
The increase, the 15 municipalities with the biggest increase in sales, 12 of them were resort towns. One, Burlington, and 2 suburbs made up the other 3. That's where the big money is. Didn't the House originally consider a 0.75 tax instead of a 0.5% tax? Did we heard from the witness that was promoting the 0.75 tax yet? Is it 0.75%?
I don't know what witness that is. I haven't heard from anyone.
Oh, okay.
If you know who that is, we can have them in.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Originally,
Okay.
Senator, this was sort of talked about as sort of a new bracket on the property transfer tax of 1.75. What it ended up being hashed out as was a 0.5% high value property surcharge, which effectively is the same thing. So I think that's what you might have heard from, I think, Mr. Tucker on the previous sheet. There was some discussion in Ways and Means about setting the cap at $1.5 million as well, but with the same rate. So those are the discussions that I remember in Ways and Means.
Okay. Madam Chair, my questions are designed to try and understand why we keep doing what we're doing, which is giving tax breaks to the same people and squeezing the revenues on everyone else. So it's a tough question to ask. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Saratin.
So Graham, being that you've touched upon Ways and Means a little bit, I'm confused. It seems like they raised taxes through the property transfer tax surcharge by about, if I do the math, it looks close to 5 or 6 million before you get to FY26. They're collecting $6 million more than they needed to. And on the ed fund, they're shorting the ed fund by 900,000 a year without anybody questioning that. Can you give me some explanation for some of these things that seem somewhat inconsistent, other than that we are the legislature?
So I think you're right in your assessment of how the bill shakes out in terms of the money. I don't want to speak for the Ways and Means Committee, but this bill was being passed at the time when the budget was being passed, and so I can't say whether it's possible that the Appropriations Committee was given the sort of funding of the programs that they wanted to fund, needing a little bit of extra money to fill those holes. So it's not as if the goal of this bill, I don't believe, was to make a completely revenue neutral swap for the general fund. There might have been other competing priorities in the Appropriations Committee that led to raising a little bit more money.
And how about on the education fund?
The education fund, they did not offset any revenues there, and as far as I know, there's no changes in the appropriations or uses in the education fund.
And I
they
think
did-
unless, we should have Mark Peralta in unless Graham has the numbers on the ed fund. I've heard surpluses being kicked around.
Yeah,
So just basically it was felt in the House that the ed fund can afford $900,000 a year hit.
I don't want to speak for the committee, but they did not offset any revenue on that reduction.
Thank you.
We'll get a report on the present status of the ed fund. I know we took a $30 million hit with pensions. So Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wonder, this is the miscellaneous tax bill, and I was wondering when.
No, this is the revenue bill, not tax.
Oh, okay. This is
Miscellaneous revenue.
miscellaneous revenue. Okay, sorry.
It just is raising them through taxes.
It's my first time at this particular rodeo.
I don't know that we've had a miscellaneous revenue bill in the past, so.
So I wonder when you'd like us to bring up any amendments that we might have. I sent you a few miscellaneous things that I've been working on with Abby and Graham.
Oh, that was for miscellaneous tax.
So there is.
Right, that was the clothing exemption and
then there's a couple other things. So yeah, that I just want to get a chance to present it to the committee and get feedback. And
no, when we do miscellaneous tax, if we make any changes anywhere, like the PPP, they will go on miscellaneous tax, and that will also do that. Why this came over, it may just be that these issues came up, and it is not unusual for the Appropriations Committee to send a note across the hall and say, we're $10 million short. We need you to raise it. That clean water surcharge was one of those instances when this committee needed to find an ongoing funding for clean water. And I don't know what the motivation with this is. It is dealing with taxes and it is dealing with tax credits. And yes, these could all go on the miscellaneous tax bill and probably be completely germane.
They could all be one bill and be germane, could they not?
That's what I'd said, yes.
Yeah.
They'll have the word tax in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's not overly complex. I think I'm going to, at this point, I will have, yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
you brought up the revenues raised for clean water. It's my understanding that the appropriations bill has a notwithstanding provision that diverts
They
the
are
water
doing,
from,
there is.
diverts the money from the clean water fund that was a tax. And there's so many moving fluid parts here.
They are not taking the money or diverting it. They are replacing it with ARPA funds. And then, okay.
A legal
And
sleight
then
of
when
hand.
the
Okay,
ARPA
okay,
funds
yep,
go
yep.
away, that tax will go back to clean water. And I believe the issue now is they're trying to do a gradual step rather than a cliff. But they're not taking the money, they're just replacing it with other money, so they have that tax revenue in the general fund.
Okay, a bookkeeping thing that we have asked them to take on. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
A few of those. Senator Pearson.
Well, and to further that conversation, I believe part of the strategy is to free up general fund to hit the pension shortfall,
Yes.
which you cannot use ARPA money for.
That is one of the strategies. There are several things that are not covered in the governor's budget, the pension being one, state colleges being another. there's some big holes. And that's why there's the push to kind of, and these are ongoing holes. They're not something we can do one kind spending for. So that's the push to get some more money into the general fund. Okay. Committee. If we're ready, I think we need to go back to committee discussion on 360 broadband. And I've been trying to print out the worksheet that Senator Pearson, Senator Hardy did over the weekend. I can't get it to print. I don't know if Faith can bring it up. This is a worksheet, so it's not something we put up on the, that was posted. But
Senator Cummings, I don't have a copy.
you don't have a copy. All right. So maybe.
We could obviously send it to Faith.
Can you send it to Faith? So it took me a few minutes to figure out how to open it. There's the bill, and then there's another section that has the additions or subtractions that you were thinking of. And I could get the bill to come up. I couldn't get the additions and subtractions when I tried to print it, but I didn't really have enough time to play with it either. I was on my computer, not my iPad. So if you can send it to Faith, and then we can work from there. And can we type in, or can you type in?
Yeah, Chris, why don't you share it?
can
And then
share it,
you can
yeah.
Yeah,
type.
why don't you share it? And
Yeah.
then you could type in, that
You're
would
good
work.
at that. You did it great when we were doing it.
Good. And then you can
make me
type.
do that. That's fine. I'm happy to do it, but you got to give me a minute to go get a glass of water because I'm parched.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to pour a glass of water too.
Don't divert it.
For what, the water? It's Montpelier's finest.
We lost Bray. Where did he go?
Senator Bray is in institutions.
He's
He
drinking
has a
Burlington more.
testimony.
He's
Okay.
sinking a ferry boat.
Senator Cummings, if you could take a look at a text or two that you've been sent this afternoon, it would be
Oh.
great.
Wait. I thought I did that already.
Thank you.
Oh. Okay, so I need to look at the chat.
All right.
No, it's a text from a senator.
Let me
Okay.
all right.
All right.
All right. I think, can you see a Word doc? It says H360.
Yes.
Well, let me know if you want to proceed or how you want to.
Okay, I'm answering the text that. Okay, I've answered my text. Okay. So we can start through on this. And the first thing is findings and intent.
And there's a lot of them.
Yep. So let's start. You didn't do any red lines in here, right?
I think we did actually, yeah, we did. Well, there was I think a typo.
Okay, yeah, communications union districts were authorized.
Yeah, they were not created by the state, but they were, I
That's
just
right.
think that was
Yeah.
accurate.
They were created by the communities that decided to form
Yeah,
them.
we authorized them, and then this was sort of nitpicky, but the language said where existing providers are not providing adequate service. I thought it built our case to say are unwilling to meet the needs of their residents. Anyway, but it's pretty small potatoes.
For all of their residents, yeah.
Yeah, and then the House had said while ensuring public accountability. That seems.
All this, I have to take your pictures off the screen, so you'll have to holler.
Yeah, so this is not a big deal. Those are just some sort of editorial comments. And the House seemed to be building their case in the findings. And I don't know, Maria, was that sort of a legal strategy, or was that just readability or something?
Oh, that's what you do. Maria there?
I thought she was there. Maybe I can't see.
I think findings.
Yes,
Oh,
I am here. Sorry about that, Senator Pearson. So
Broadband is-
you were asking about whether some of the findings were related to building their legal.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they were written as if we were wanting them to be read in a court case to defend what we were doing, and I that just struck me as kind of strange. But I don't know. That's maybe a distraction, but I just wondered if you had any idea of the motivation.
Yeah, was there a particular finding or just in general?
Just kind of all of them, but
yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know that was actually a lot of these findings were worked out by various members of the House Energy Committee, so I can't speak for them.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I don't know that there was anything in here that they were particularly worried about a legal challenge, but just in general, yeah, stating the need for regulations and what's transpired already historically in the state and what the state of the market is. Yeah, I don't know that there was a particular legal issue they were concerned about in their bill.
So, Madam Chair, I think it's fair to explain that Senator Hardy and I were not trying to say, here's the bill we should pass,
right,
but rather, first of all, reviewing the House bill more thoroughly, and then trying to, where we notice little edits, add them, and to raise big questions, just to help us, because we have what now, 3 days to go at the most?
No, I think we're getting I mean, they need a number. I've told them to hold with the 150 million. The one thing that's in question is the use of the connectivity fund and the E911 funding. From what I've heard, the House has put 1.8 million in the budget to cover E911 for 2 years. But this is a systemic deficit, as I remember the testimony. So in year 3, what happens? The traditional funding source and the E911 got primacy in that connectivity fund. We changed that. So I'm not comfortable in taking the connectivity fund and using it to fund broadband. But if we're only going to do this for 2 years, then fine, the money goes away, it goes back to 911. I'm kind of thinking we're going to need somebody in charge of promoting broadband for longer than 2 years. Even if it's back to the, $10,000 a year we got out of the connectivity fund. We haven't been happy with the department. We've recognized that there is a conflict between promoting and regulating. So that and the any kind of subsidy or affordability, which is part of equity, are the two big financial issues we haven't addressed. The other one, and I got some feedback of anxiety from Senate appropriations about putting all of our money in the CUD basket. And what if they don't get up and running, or all of them don't get up and running? And so the House seems much more relaxed with that. And I think Senate Appropriations is a little more relaxed, but we could find that some CUDs don't get up and running in time to string wire or cable fiber. Got to watch my words every day this year.
Okay, well,
Before the money runs out. I mean, those are some of the questions that are still hanging out there.
yeah, and I don't know, Madam Chair, if you want to jump to those juicy questions or keep working through and again, this is an attempt to organize the thinking, not to make the decisions. But for instance, here on page 5, so little a was all the findings. B, therefore, this act intended to protect the public interest by. The House's language immediately, this is a big decision point, I think. Ensuring broadband availability to all Vermonters, and all Vermont addresses is how they had it. And Senator Hardy and I spent some time debating this, but I for my opinion, and I think for the purposes of this draft, Senator Hardy agreed with me. I think it's a mistake to talk about broadband to all Vermonters. I mean, that is a worthy goal and maybe something we should pursue. But right now, we kind of need to be dealing with addresses, I think. We didn't, when they talked about rural electrification, I'm not sure they talked about electric bills. They were talking about, we got to get people connected. And so I don't know, but from where I'm coming from, it's a separate project to deal with affordability. This is about getting to the addresses.
Okay. And that's what this says. We're going to run the lines by all the addresses.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I
Senator
just raised
Crocker.
the competing view. And to me, you may get broadband to every address in Vermont, but if a substantial portion of the population who needs it for essential reasons can't get it, this is a failure. To me, you have to consider both. If you don't consider both, then this is not a successful project. If we have things out there that the people who need it for Medicare, for medication, for education, and for going back and forth to work don't have it and can't afford it, we haven't accomplished anything.
Well, I just don't know how you get your arms around it. We don't build roads and then subsidize people's gasoline.
No, but we don't build roads where nobody drives. We do still have class 4 roads. You can drive them up if you want in the summer, but we don't plow them in the winter because there aren't enough people up there to justify it.
So
we have to, in my mind, come up with at least a strategy for doing it. We won't get all the details done, particularly in the time that we've got before we adjourn this session. But we have to at least come up with a strategy for how we're going to deal with that, or charge someone with dealing that so that they're on effectively a parallel track.
We have to come up with a strategy.
Madam Chair,
Okay, I heard Senator McDonald first, and then I will take Senator Hardy. So Senator McDonald, you have a strategy?
We have come up with a strategy. We wish to confine public dollars to building to unserved and underserved areas. That's our strategy to in a down the road effort to get it everywhere where it's available. That's a strategy.
Yeah, but that's not the strategy for this.
How we hook those people up and whether or not we help them pay their bills are the next questions to be answered. But we have a strategy on where we want the things to be built out
that
to.
strategy isn't questioned. The question is, are we wasting, we're going to run it by your address, but you can't afford to hook up. Have we succeeded?
We have done what is the best use of this money at this time. I live adjacent to the interstate highway. You could, when it was built, you could hear a car go by and there was silence until you heard the next one come by. But that interstate highway was hooked up to, and people moved next to it, and that was how it came to pass. That's what we're building.
Okay, so we're on build it and they will come.
And we'll probably help them.
That is still one of the issues. The issue is affordability.
No, it's available.
Right now, we're focusing on access.
So, this is a decision point, I think, for us. And in this working draft, Sarah Hardy and I went one way.
Well, I guess I just want to add, Senator Brock, I completely hear you. And I think charging someone to deal with this issue is really important, because you're right. If we build all this stuff and people can't afford it and access it, then we haven't met our goals. And I think that we need to stay focused on the sort of task of getting the tech built out, the actual, hardware or whatever you want to call it, the infrastructure built. And there are provisions later in the bill that talk about affordability and access as related to how the grants are distributed. And so those are sort of factors that play into the distribution of the funds to projects. And I think we could certainly add language that this entity would have to come back and report to us on what their plan is for ensuring affordable access as things are built out, or something like that, so that we can maybe take it in 2 steps without losing the focus on actually building the network to under and unserved areas.
Well, in my mind, I think that one of the things that we have been talking about, and I think the federal government is talking about it as well, is how do we get people online? It's not how do we build stuff, how do we look at the end result of what it is we're trying to achieve? And as we look at the CUD, this idea of building to these unserved addresses, we're talking about building to about 60,000 addresses, and there are about 300,000 addresses in Vermont right now, some of which are already being served, and some of which are not, by legacy providers and other forms of internet access. And to me, as part of strategy, our strategy is not to build a road. Our strategy is to move people from one place to another. And that's a higher level strategy. And unless we start looking at it from the top down, we're sort of, in this case, kind of looking at it from the middle down, and then figuring out, well, at some point, we're going to look from the middle up again. And that, to me, is a failed strategy. It's an incomplete, not failed, it's an incomplete strategy.
Okay. We're going to have that one. We're still,
Shall I move on?
yes, I think we should move on. That one is still an unresolved issue, and I don't think we're going to be able to resolve it until we get into the money sections.
Can I just add that I agree with Senator Brock?
Okay.
Senator Sorokin?
I just wanted to add, without getting too detailed, I agree with Senator Brock, and I don't think it's sufficient to, planning on affordability can happen, but it has to happen sort of simultaneously with planning on the build out. I don't think it can come as a second tier because the affordability aspect could impact on how you approach the accessibility aspect. So I think all along, even in the initial stages, we have been making sure that where we could, we have had affordability programs, and the federal law that gives us all this money also gives us some money for a subsidy program. So I just think that essentially I agree with what Senator Brock has said, that we can't just leave this as a second tier citizen.
Okay.
Let
So
me
we're
add
gonna-
one thing if I can without prolonging the discussion. That one of the things, as far as this build out, just as an example, is we're tasking the CUDs, for which this is largely focused, to come up with business plans. If those business plans don't take into account the issue of affordability, the business accounts are flawed to begin with. And that has to be thought through, not as an afterthought.
And that's required in the bill. It's just later in the bill.
Okay, we're gonna walk through, but I think I also heard the CUDs say that they are going to be heavily leveraged for, the first 10 years. They are not going to be able to afford a $25 a month fee because they're not making any profit. Their money is all going to pay off their revenue bonds and to string the wire. So that is an issue. Did I see you, Senator McDonald?
They're nonprofits.
Yes.
So that's not a worry. They have to pay off their bills.
And
Yeah.
So can we, would Senators Pearson and Hardy give us the kind of beginning to end of their proposals, and then we can look at the whole package?
Okay, that's fine. I don't think they've got any major new proposals. So this is really the committees walking through this. So let's keep going.
so that was the easy stuff. All right. So here they're sort of setting up, that they're commenting that we're alleviating the tension between the department being a promoter and a regulator, et cetera, et cetera. So then they come up with the authority. And I kind of wish, if it were me, we would skip this right now. I think I have been one of the holdouts on, do we even need an authority? And I've come to believe that we do, or that's where the votes are. But what it looks like and who's on it, to me, is secondary. But anyway,
I
Sarah,
agree
I
with
did
you.
put some thinking into it. For one thing, we just got rid of duplicative findings. And we didn't change the makeup or anything, but we did wonder, they seemed sort of in the House proposal to be sparsely, they had a big authority and almost no staff, which seemed sort of upside down to us. And so we wrestled with that a little bit. I don't really know how you want to deal with that, Madam Chair.
We did change the number of members. This is the section.
Yeah, you're down to 5.
Aligning with the conversation, we went from 7 down to 5, and we deleted the 2 public members that would be appointed by the CUDs, and just kept it with sort of state appointees. And that was sort of based on a conversation we had last week. Senator Brock, I know, had concerns about the size. So, and I agreed that 7 seemed like too many.
And is there any discussion about payment?
Yes, they're given per diems, I think.
Okay, so.
But that's only for 3 because the other.
Yeah, but who's getting paid then?
There's a public member appointed by the speaker and one by the Senate.
Yeah, okay, but these.
Oh, they're staff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So who's the executive director?
So they are empowered to, so we'll set aside who makes up the board.
Yeah, that we can,
So they
everybody will rewrite that because everybody has a different idea. I'm more interested in who's
shall
doing the
hire
work.
an employee executive director. Shall serve as the chief
So
administrator
we've got
officer.
one person.
Yeah, and then they're tasked with a bunch of stuff.
Like attend all meetings.
Yeah, approve all accounts.
Only the House has time to get into this.
I thought we should send it to Senator White. Then Senator Hardy and I asked some questions here. So then it says the director may retain or employ technical experts and other officers, agents, employees, contractors necessary to give effect to the purpose of this chapter, including areas of finance. That we wondered, should we consider outlining 2 to 3 people positions to work here? I mean, the House has it set up where the board will have expertise in finance and expertise in engineering. And Senator Hardy and I were thinking, we actually need these people to be not coming to a quarterly meeting, but to be on staff. They're after all, the vision, I think, has been they are effectively this technical expert consultants for the CUDs. And so later on, they do suck in the Rob Fish position and maybe one other. But I don't know, it seemed like heavy on board seats and light on people doing the work to us.
I will say I share that concern. If we are, in fact, going to if we were going to open this up and say anybody that wants to apply can apply for grants, then you've got legacy carriers who have in-house engineering experience, finance, they've got it all. If we are putting most or all of our eggs into the CUDs, some of whom have some expertise, some of whom are still just forming, if we want them to be up and running and able to string fiber before this money goes away, then we're going to have to give them, they've got to have somebody they can call and say, I'm sending you this contract with my local wireless phone carrier. What do you think?
It's an excellent point, Madam Chair, because I was thinking about that. But you're also raising, they are going to be overseeing the grant. So they're advising and granting.
Yeah.
And both of those require expertise and knowledge. So I do continue to think we need to make sure they're staffed adequately. I mean, I don't know, Senator Brock, you've thought about this a lot more than a lot of us, but part of what's happened is we haven't dedicated the staff and expertise, right, over the years.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely, and that's going to be key. Whether you call it a chairman or a chairperson, or whether you call it executive director, it's what's underneath that in terms of people who actually know how to be able to do the things that need to be done. And you've outlined at least some of those things. And it seems to me that as far as compensation, you can look at people who are employed either as employees or contractors, filling certain key positions, or for that matter, you can also look at a compensated board as opposed to the typical per diem board, much like, for example, you think of the Public Service Board, in which you have a board chair who's a compensated person, and you have two others who serve as board members, but who also have specific functions that involve work. We seem to have enough boards involved in all of this as it is when we look at the various legislative committees who are providing oversight.
So
Green Mountain Care Board is another compensated board.
Right. Those are jobs that we
right.
call.
Those are jobs.
So that's true. That's another way to get at this, and maybe that is the vision that the House had. So I'm hearing actually broad agreement without the details, but generally we need to make sure whatever this authority is has staff, has the expertise to effectively award grants and presumably bolster, offer this technical support, financial support to the CUDs.
Yes.
So then they set up the fund. And I think if I'm remembering, and Senator Hardy, jump in anytime, that the fund sort of absorbs some of the other fund. Here's where the money transferred to the fund pursuant to some blah, 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 shall be used to fund the appropriate expenses of the authority, including rural broadband telecom technical assistance specialist. That's Rob. So it's some of that sort of moving what we already have, I think.
Yes, it's basically moving the connectivity initiative and the Universal Service Fund funding over to this new entity.
There's a bunch of things paid out of that Universal Service Fund. They're just transferring the connectivity section.
Correct. There's just the 0.4%, which goes to the Vermont. If you scroll up a little, Chris, the Vermont Community Broadband Fund.
Yep.
And there, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so this will be important because different decision points needs to web together here, but more or less that's what they're doing. Here's the powers and duties. Here's where they and here and in their charge here is facilitate partnerships between community CUDs and potential partners. We've all, I think, at one point or another wondered about the term partner, and maybe we just asked the question, shouldn't we just be talking about contracts and dispense with this strange notion that we're all friends here? I mean, we are all friends, but anyway, so that's where maybe we would look at that.
One question about this concept of partnerships. You mean, I think we should be leaving open the possibility of a variety of different business arrangements, some of which could be public-private partnerships, some of which could be contractual agreements, and some of which could be things that we haven't quite thought of yet. But I mean, there are different ways that if we allow a degree of freedom to CUDs or others to come up with things that work, they're not all going to be alike. And I think the more flexibility we allow, with appropriate oversight, I think we may have a healthier result.
I tend to agree. We didn't write that down here, but elsewhere, I think we've all talked about this. I've not heard us say, as the House did, it all must go through CUD. I think we've been wrestling with how do we bring in the Waitsfield Telecoms and Franklin Telecoms, and to me that makes sense. And Senator Brock says the flexibility if we're hitting certain goals. So you can't get it unless you're wed to universal access or whatever those benchmarks are that we think right size the business structures here for Vermont for our needs. They were suggesting that the authority advocate for things at the federal level. That seemed to me to be a distraction.
They got enough to do here.
Yeah, so maybe we would strip 4 out. Then they are charged with working with VITA and here to assist communication CUDs with pursuing route identification. it strikes me that this is sort of very specific, and wouldn't we just say help the CUDs with their all of it?
All their tech, yeah.
And then this is where, you know, they really are helping with the planning, I think. So we added coordinate that something, this is not wordsmithed at all, but coordinate with private providers eligible, you know, under whatever we say is eligible. And this has been a consistent issue here. It's not, we do need the authority to have a bigger vantage than just CUDs. Like they need to know that the CUDs can plug in with the consolidated networks or whatever it is. Sarah Brock, I've heard you say this. Definitely people have said we can't have these little islands. So it strikes me we should call that out, but
I can see where the most economical thing to do, if Consolidated has done all of the streets in Montpelier, but they haven't gotten down, you know, Dog River Road yet, rather than have a CUD have to string through Montpelier to hook up to do that road, that it would be much more economical and efficient to just give them a grant to finish the town. I mean,
Yeah. Them being who?
the Consolidated,
Or you
the
could give it to
carrier
this-
that's done 9/10 of the town.
Yeah.
Rather than
Okay.
wait for a CUD, have them provide the service to the 10% that wasn't economical for them to do on their own.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's a logical possible choice. Another logical possible choice would be if the incumbent carrier isn't getting around to it too soon, and the CUD wanted to connect to the end of that, they could work out some sort of a contract. There will be another
Yeah,
logical choice.
we are here with
Yep.
like
Yep.
3 years, if we're lucky, to run this. So
So that,
it's
those are
all
both-
there's gonna be contracts, and you're not gonna get paid until it's done, and the contracts have a time frame.
okay, so both of those suggestions
Yes.
should be within the CUDs to work out with the IEPs to
Or,
do either of those two choices.
or the board, I think that Consolidated should have the ability to apply to this authority and say, you know, for a grant of $50,000, we could do the last 3 miles or 9 miles up that back road. Just like Franklin Telephone can say, on our own, for 2 people who aren't going to sign up, we can't do those 9 miles. But if you subsidize us, we'll do the 9 miles.
Those could be possibilities, and
Okay,
they would-
good.
and they
That's all I'm
would have to
saying.
be agreed on in the bill, what was possible.
it does bring up a question, Madam Chair. Maria, are you still with us?
Don't hear her, but sometimes takes her a few minutes to get connected.
Does anyone know, is a CUD automatically committed to universal coverage by its very nature?
I don't know. I assume they have a charter that has been voted on by the membership.
Well, if they don't have that, they ought to.
Yeah.
Maria's here. I see her.
Maria's here. She may
Anyhow.
be having technical difficulties.
So as Senator Brock says, if they don't have a charter, they ought to, and perhaps that's one of the things that the authority would say, look, we're here to approve stuff, but we're not going to approve it unless you have a charter that spells out what you, the CUD, commit to or don't commit to.
Okay, I'm going to check. I can't believe we missed that in the authorizing legislation.
Yeah.
You can't just form a town.
So Maria, could you nod, or are we not able to hear you for some reason?
I can't even, well, let me see if I can
I do see her.
All
So
right.
are they by
Can
their
you hear
name?
me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So, okay, now I can
sorry.
see a couple of you.
Yes, so the towns elect to join the CUD. They have membership on a governing board, each town, and they enact their own bylaws to build out service universally in all those towns. In terms of how they actually go about their deployment, where they build service, you know, I don't know exactly what the criteria are, but the expectation is that all locations in the member towns will have service. So it might
Was
be a
that
question of
specifically stated though, Maria, in terms of their charter? I know you use the word universally. Is it so stated in the charters for the CUDs that they will provide either universal service or that they will reach all addresses within their districts?
I don't know. I'm going to look right now under the chapter Title 30 that creates the CUDs and see if it addresses that. I don't know specific, bylaws for each one, but let me see what I can find out.
Statute just says that's what they're being enacted for.
Correct.
And
Well-
also, I'll just note while Maria's looking that up, that later in the bill, there are requirements for distribution of grants that I think we can strengthen the language to make sure that it's required, but there are provisions about universal coverage of an area. And I think we can make that even more explicit.
I think we should also take care to.
So what it
Overburden.
says under district powers, the district has the power to, it's the power to provide communication services for its district members, including the residential and business locations located therein. Such other locations, contiguous towns, if possible. Yeah, so I don't know that it's more specific than that, but I'm literally reading through it, the authorizing chapter now, and that's chapter 82 of Title 30.
Well, I think that may be something that we will want to clarify because, I would hate to be creating a group of municipal Comcasts that once they get their bill done, they're in a position of saying, well, there is this one house 2 miles up the road, but it's too expensive for us to do that, and therefore we won't do it. And that's what we're trying to prevent. And we're trying, indeed, I think in this bill, when we give money to the commercial or legacy providers to get something back that improves access more broadly than simply paying them to maintain a monopoly up a particular road.
I agree with that. I would also add, though, that I wouldn't want a CUD should be in a position to help a town where 30% of the town has nothing and not have to, other than incidentally, build over the 70% that's already got broadband access, or 24, whatever it is. I just, it's a costly endeavor, and the goal here is to build out, not overlay something that so somehow we can finesse that, but it's
somehow we can, but we recognize that to the extent that a CUD has to build, for example, in a territory that is now inhabited by a legacy provider, I think the CUDs are counting on the fact that they will have better service. They will have 100, whereas the legacies typically don't. And they will be able to offer things that some legacy providers will not, at least in terms of speed. And the net effect is that they will actually pick up additional business in those territories that they might not now have. So I think that should be a consideration too.
Yes.
But
Yes,
the
Madam
last
Chair.
thing, though, that we want to do is that we want to create the CUDs and then have them the ability to in effect cherry pick themselves.
Yes.
That's
That's
not
a
what
real
we're gonna do.
problem. Yep.
Right, and it seems, since we're all just talking, it seems to me that what we should be doing with the bill, and what I think the House started to do and we can strengthen, is setting the guardrails, setting the requirements, and setting up the structure, but not going through every single possible scenario and what we think the outcome should be, because that's what we're creating this board and staff for.
Well, that is, but one of the things associated with that is to determine when we get to creating the board, the staff, or whatever the governance structure is, how much it is empowered to, on the one hand, help the CUDs, on the other hand, tell them what to do. And somewhere in the middle is the right answer as to, where that lies, and we have to think through that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Absolutely.
So, but when we bring up these hypotheticals, and we were a few minutes back talking about, will CUDs be committed to, will have to reach all addresses within their area, that they would be obliged to seek to reach all those addresses, or see that all those addresses were reached. And that's two different things. They can choose to contract with a independent service provider, or they can do it themselves. But there has to be an accommodation for both those choices.
Yeah, I think
And
that,
you've got to you have to empower the authority to push and get them to those choices, rather than solve which is which here today amongst ourselves.
right.
Mhm.
I think, though, the reality is there is not going to be enough money, at least at this point, to do everything we want to have done.
Correct. So what do we want to have done first?
So we're going to have to set this authority up. The one thing we were told is we need to give them clear goals, clear tasks, and tell them what we expect. And they need to be removed from the political wins.
So in the example that you gave, Madam Chair, that there's a road somewhere that has 3 more miles to go. And the CUDs are in charge of finding a way to get there. And if the CUDs just blow it off and say, we're not willing to invest our money for that expansion, and the investor-owned utilities, you would say, well, how much would we have to send to the investor-owned utilities to up that mile? And the investor-owned utilities say, no way in hell we're going up that last 3 miles. Then the authority has to make a decision on whether that gets left undone, whether that's hookup money, or whether some of the CUD's money, the CUD has to enter into a contract using some of their money. Those are the
That's
only
all
choices
assuming there is money.
until the money runs out.
All right. I think you can assume that the CUDs, like everyone else, are going to run it to the easiest places first. There are places in Orange County that EC Fiber hasn't reached. At least they hadn't when I was getting my hair cut in June. Something like a 1/4 mile up a dirt road.
Okay.
There may,
Okay.
and nobody may want to pay for the service up there.
Wait,
Okay, so we've got a lot. We're not going to make all those decisions for every back road in Vermont. We need to set up an authority with enough direction so they can make the decisions and give them enough leeway to do it.
Yeah, we've got
All
30
right.
pages to go here.
Okay.
I think Senator
You all can
McDonald-
happily, I have to leave in 15 minutes, but you're welcome to continue.
I think I heard Senator McDonald express it fairly succinctly, that, they are, CUDs should be directed to cover or see that their people are covered.
Yep.
In other words, account for the people that, not be forced to overbuild somebody that's already got access. one lingering question is, if the authority is coordinating broadband beyond just the CUDs, Maria, does Comcast, for instance, when they're doing a build or a network expansion, do they have to get does anyone oversee that, or do they just go and they must have to get permits of some kind, right? Is there a public intersection?
So you're talking about actually stringing wires?
Yeah, I mean, if Comcast is, for an example, going to take on some town, okay, we're bringing service to your town. Do they just do that as a right of operating a business? Or what I'm trying to understand is, could the authority have any ability to understand next year's plans from the legacies as they're also helping the CUDs choose priorities?
Can I rephrase that?
Statute, sure.
May I rephrase that question for you, Senator Pearson?
Please.
Well, if Comcast wants to go down the road on a telephone pole and someone else wants to go down the road on the telephone pole with fiber, and Comcast wants to go down with coaxial cable, will the authority be directed to pick one of those two choices if both of them have the money to do what the job is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, is there any state intervention for somebody building a network or expanding their current network?
I think the short answer is, for broadband networks, the answer is really no. Cable companies traditionally, they have franchise service territories. Broadband providers, the state, other than things like siting, the state doesn't really have, there isn't like a point at which the state can say, no, you cannot build, right? That's the whole non-regulation of broadband and networks. In terms of access to deployment plans, this was addressed a number of years ago, and there is a statute in Vermont law that recognizes that having access to deployment plans would be helpful to the state, but that you can't require providers to submit that information, at least have it be publicly disclosed. So there is, yeah.
The question that I was trying to ask was, when there is a telephone pole out there that is regulated by the public, by the state, and there's two requests to go up on that pole, which is a regulated pole, can we discriminate between the two based on the level of service the stringing of the product is likely to provide, not on who owns it, but the level of service?
So then what you're asking is, for pole attachments, can the state require broadband providers to provide, say, 100 symmetrical service in Vermont generally, right? For anyone, that's what you're basically at. Or no, I'm not saying that you're saying 100, but that you're requiring some service
in order to, but we don't own the poles.
But we regulate the poles, not the service. The poles we do.
But you don't regulate the internet service provider.
Right.
So you can have a condition where they can voluntarily apply to receive a grant based on the state's conditions. But in terms of just building out their networks, requiring a certain level of service, I don't think you can do that. This is the issue that you're raising is the state's authority with respect to, might not own the pole, but you own in many instances the public right of way. And what kind of authority in exchange for use of the right of way can the states exact some benefit? But I don't think you can go so far as to provide a certain minimum service just for building out a network. I think because of federal preemption.
If there's a pole that has room for one more strand of something, either coaxial cable or fiber, and it needs approval from the public PUC to make a change to those poles, the PUC can't say, don't tell us which customer is applying for it. We will only, in those cases, we will approve the customer that is asking to put up fiber before we will approve the one asking to put up something less than fiber.
I thought everyone had a right to hang on the pole. And if there was not room, then a bigger pole had to be provided. I've never heard of us having the ability, we don't own the poles. And I thought, I've heard more than once that everybody has a right to hang on those poles.
Okay, I don't know the answer to the question, Madam Chair. If I asked it, and I don't want to, I hope we'll think about it before we try and answer that, but that needs to be answered. Thank you.
I think that's generally right. The rules, the PUC doesn't decide who gets on the poles generally. There is a process that they oversee. But any new entrant, any attaching entity can apply to hang their wires or attach their wireless facilities to poles. And there is a provision that, yes, if there isn't enough room, that new poles can be built and those expenses can be shared. So I don't know the situation where they're,
room for one more wire, one more place without having to build a new pole. Who gets it? Highest bidder, or is it in the state's
Put up
priority?
a new pole.
Or, and there
Okay, can we move on? We don't know the answer.
Okay, so that ends up being an important potentially thing if we're asking the authority to have broader sort of access to or look at the whole broadband system, not just the new and up and coming CUDs. Next, the House is talking about funding priorities, and you'll see they just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we were wondering if we should sort of be creating a pecking order. And I don't know precisely what that would be, but do we want to articulate here that we're particularly excited about CUDs that are working with utilities, or I don't know, but these are all offered as equal, though they're numbered, I believe. So that's one question here. The other question is the speeds of at least 100. Is that does that continue to be the right indicator? Not to open up the debate about what is the right speed, but I had asked, I think it was a few of the CDs, including Hultquist, should we just be talking about fiber as opposed to speeds, the technology versus a delivery? And I don't know the answer. I've always thought the 100 was a little strange, but anyway.
Fiber, because we heard a lot of these folks may still choose to only pay for 25/3.
Yeah, but that's what they're buying.
Right, but the fiber is, we've heard, can go up to anything. So if we just say 100, 5 years from now, is that like saying 5.1?
Right. I guess that's sort of my point, but
Yeah.
I don't feel strongly about it, but it has surfaced as a question.
I think
Well, whatever we
fiber's-
put in now, we can obviously change in another legislative year if what we put in is outdated. From everything we've heard, though, fiber does have, at least from everything we know now, the longest life on the one hand, plus the greatest flexibility for expanding capacity as we go forward. Not to say that Starlink a year from now may have many more satellites and much faster speed, but I think we have time, a year from now to change this if we have to.
Okay, well, again, we'll just raise the question.
Right.
There is talk
To
here.
take a look at and think through these priorities and decide if we want them, if we want to add, subtract, and if we want to prioritize. And maybe that could be homework.
Yep, I think
One of the things that I think we also might want to, in terms of prioritization, obviously the amount of funds we have available will drive some of the things we do and how we affect the implementation of the priorities. But we still have that now issue. And we still have CUDs telling us that, gee, we're not going to be able to get to our territory at the best for 5 to 6 years. And the question then is, what do we do for the people in the interim who need connectivity and don't get it? And as we look at the amount of funds we have available, do we in fact add another track to deal with people who are still unserved and will likely to be unserved for years to come? Do we
yeah,
kill the good for the perfect?
well, sure.
On that note, I have to leave. You're welcome to continue.
Thank you.
Well,
This is
Can I-
just getting interesting.
One quick note on 100 versus fiber was when we wrote that 7 years ago, that's back when people were getting like 1 or 2 and 1, stuff like that. So it was so far out ahead that we were just trying to be very forward looking at that point and not build something obsolete. And we were trying to stay technology agnostic. We didn't want to name fiber over something else because we were really interested in the performance level. And that's
Senator
why.
McDonald, you're in
that's why it's
charge.
there.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My condolences, committee.
I consider myself drafted. Thank you.
Well,
You finished, Senator Bright?
well,
yes,
you
other than
pose
now
your
your
question.
afternoon's ruined because now as town moderator, you can't do anything. You have just to call on people. So
well, my afternoon maybe isn't ruined. So that is my memory, Senator Bray, is that we were trying to be more agnostic. There were a lot of people pushing the idea of fixed wireless, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
convinced we need to revisit that, but
Right.
if we wanted to, this would be the bill.
Right. Durability, I think, is what we're really after, right? We want an investment that's like utility-like, and they end up investing in things that have 30 and 40-year lifespans. So,
right.
I mean, that
Well,
I
it's
think is really,
durability and future proofing.
yes, that's really that's a better word when I say durability and future.
So in here, they're starting to talk about money, and Senator Hardy and I, if you're seeing on, where are we now, page 16, middle of the page, they're talking about $9 million by the end of September, which it seemed like a strange number and an odd date. And we just wanted us to all keep in mind that there is some money in H315 that was also part of the sort of short term. And so no decisions or suggestions there, but other than we need to make sure it all hangs together, because I don't know that the House depended on 315 when they were passing this. if it makes sense to you, Senator McDonald, I'll just keep cranking through to the sort of big decision or question points.
Continue.
This is here, this must still be under their charges. Lending and grant decisions shall be made by the authority, but then VITA shall service all the loans. And so that interplay is not entirely clear to me anyway. And VITA's loans are kind of small compared to the money we're talking about here, but they continue to be a part of the puzzle. So how it all fits together.
Yeah, that's
plus
one of the
there's
things
no
that
actual lending money, right? So that was another strange thing.
one of the issues about this is that it really focused on lending and grants, and it was not broad enough to think about the fact that there could be other kinds of financial arrangements that could be made, ranging from equity arrangements to other kinds of debt outside of VITA. The assumption was that VITA would be the only lender that would be willing to, but with reserves and other partners, it's very possible that you could have anything from outside venture capital to other commercial entities that might be willing under certain circumstances to lend. There presumably would come a point for all of these CUDs in which they would do what I think EC Fiber is trying to do now, and that is go out to, in effect, the secondary market, or go out to another market other than VITA. So I would be hesitant to limit this solely to VITA. I would think more broadly.
Yeah, and I don't believe the House is limiting it to VITA, but they are saying that the authority has to be engaged, that VITA services the authority's loans. But again, there's no loan money. So it's sort of strange. Just flag it that we have to get clear on that.
Yeah, well, what it's saying essentially, though, that any money that we put into this, VITA has to be the one to loan it out. I think that's what it's saying.
I don't think there's anything in the bill that prohibits them from going to a commercial lender, Senator Brock. They could go get a loan from whomever they want. It's just that VITA has specific money that has already been previously allocated, and then this bill contemplates maybe giving them more in the future. So they could go to the, National Bank of Middlebury and get a loan.
I think that's right. And I could
lending and
clarify a
grant
little.
decisions would be made, it had to be made through VITA if done pursuant to this section. Does that provide, Maria, any other flexibility?
Yep. Can I, so just a couple of things on this program, and you can hear me now, is that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So initially, when the House was working on this language, they established it, this was before ARPA funds, as a subordinated debt program. So with, $20 million as opposed to $150 million, they were thinking of more of the revolving loan type program or financing through VITA or other banks and lenders. When the ARPA funds became available, much more money, conditions on the spending of that money needs to be incurred before the end of 2024 and cannot be used for revolving loans. So they then expanded this particular program that you're looking at now to also be a grant program. So now it's construction grants and loans, subordinated debt. So again, it's open to any financing, subordinated debt for any financing, and singling out VITA, as Senator Hardy just mentioned, VITA does have a broadband expansion loan program that you created a few years ago. And so that might be a good financial choice. In terms of the actual servicing, so the board of directors decides who's eligible for financing for construction, whether it's grants or loans. In terms of the servicing of the loans, collecting the payments, et cetera, that's all kind of be to be administered by VITA, but they don't have the decision-making authority. And my understanding is that that is an arrangement that VITA has with other lending programs in the state, that they might service the loans, perform that kind of administrative function, but they're not actually deciding who's eligible and issuing the loans. So that's just some of the thinking and how this particular section evolved in the House.
Can I ask a question on that? First of all, what does subordinated loans mean?
So basically they're not priority loans. So if, for example, a borrower got money from VITA, VITA would be probably a secured creditor in the event of a default, might have access to the assets, any assets that are built, if there any exist, but that they would be reimbursed first for any monies that they put out. Any lending by the authority under this program would be subordinate to that. So only if their priority creditors recoup any monies that they've lent out fully, would the authority then be able to recoup any money that it lent out. So it's subordinate to a priority lender secured creditor.
In other words, a second mortgage.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense that, I don't know how we can assign VITA to that position. And
VITA would not be the subordinate lender. In this case, the authority would be the subordinate lender. To make the VITA loans, to make it more financially workable, to say the state's going to give some money and give some additional funds towards a project, but yes, they'll be subordinate to VITA's loans. So it might be an enhancement to VITA to finance some projects if there's more money available to pay for the construction.
So essentially, none of this is VITA's money. They're just like a third-party administrator of
Correct.
money.
Yes, they do have a loan program that they offer, but they are completely in control of issuing loans under their expansion loan program, totally separate. You did appropriate some money for loan loss reserves. They have made some loans to Mansfield Community Fiber already, but not to CUDs at this point, BC Fiber being the only one right now who's eligible.
So I don't think we should spend too much time here because we don't have loan money. We have grant money. We understand ARPA money will not be eligible for loaning. So, well,
revolving loans. And the question is, you might be able to loan out money, but you'd have to repay it to the Treasury. So you might not want to loan out the money, right? Okay. But they have said no revolving loans. So just to clarify.
All right. So then there's a report back. There's a sunset in, what is that, 8 years? And then there's the organization, and it seemed we noticed that it was within 60 days of the effective date, but I don't know why the effective date is July 1, but the authority isn't until January 1. So anyway, that was just a question.
So I can clarify that a little bit. So the effective date, I think, is on passage. And okay. So the authority can actually get organized within 60 days and start to administer its programs immediately as soon as it's organized, which may be October.
Okay.
When it holds its first meeting.
But isn't it there's this transition period with the department still doing some things. So that's what was confusing to us. There's this sort of overlap period where they're both authorized to be giving out money and making decisions.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, it's up to you to decide whether the timing works, but I think that gets back to that $9 million to the department for pre-construction grants. You had asked why the September deadline, or why do they have that authority to grant that money? I think the idea there was so that this money for pre-construction grants can go out immediately upon passage, and that the department can begin to get that money out the door before the new authority has a chance to be organized and even hold its first meeting, right? Because you have the appointments, then they have to schedule their initial meeting. So, and that will take up to 60 days was the thought that, you know, they need that much time. And so the money can go out by the department. The department can also issue grants under the connectivity initiative. There is some money remaining in the connectivity initiative, but that the authority, once it's up and running, can immediately start implementing programs and issuing funds as created in this bill. And then the specific connectivity initiative, which is the existing grant program, would transfer over to the administration of the authority in January. But these other programs that we just talked about, the construction grant, the pre-construction grant, the authority can start giving out those funds, those ARPA funds, as soon as it's organized and able to do that sometime in the fall.
Okay, asked and answered. Thank you, Maria. So then some of this, the different grant programs are repealed because it's effectively part of the shift. So then this is where Rob Fish is moved over. And we were wondering what happened to Clay and you know, so what, first of all, who's left at the department and what's their role? And is it only Rob Fish that moves over, or are there other positions? Because we were trying to remember what we'd heard. Maybe Maria, you could help us with that.
Yeah, so I believe the House was just envisioning that the Rob Fish position would move because his work is specific to CUDs, and as you know, their program is geared towards supporting CUDs in particular. You know, in terms of how you decide to proceed might depend on what you have the new authority doing. And so they were not looking to move anybody else from the department. That the Division of Telecommunications and Connectivity will still be doing the 10-year plan, will still be, you know, to the extent that it oversees and regulates the traditional legacy providers, that there's still that function that will continue, and that those positions will remain in the department. So.
Okay, obviously some cost questions there. Then I'm assuming they're taking sections out of the connectivity fund because it's replicated elsewhere or shifted over, right? And then this does bring up the USF shortfall and some of those questions. Then, oh yeah, this was interesting, Maria. This says the department shall transfer ownership of fiber optic assets to the CUDs. And that struck Sarah Hardy and I as a little strange, like, why would the state transfer ownership to fledgling utilities here as opposed to just making it clear they can have access? And was there any debate about that?
Yeah, I think so. So these fiber assets that the department currently owns were VTA assets, right? When they were in the business of actually owning and receiving federal grants in particular to build and own infrastructure. And then access has been leased out and continues to be leased out to various providers. So this wasn't really a huge discussion. I think the department didn't say we want to keep ownership. I don't remember a lot of debate about that. I think the thinking was that, look, it's really the CUD that's going to be in charge of deployment in their territories. And if they own the asset, they can then decide how it's used, whether there are multiple service providers that have access to it. That really it's just now going to be in the hands of each CUD to decide what is best for their communities.
Aren't some of these fiber assets loops, and can you sell some section of a loop to different entities?
When you say sell, do you mean like lease the transport or?
Well, no, the leasing is straightforward, but that's not what this is. This is a transfer of ownership.
Yes.
So, Senator Pearson, in this case, one of the problems that CUDs have before they can go to the bank and get loans is they don't own anything upon which to, any property to be held as collateral is I think we need just someone to tell us why this would be a good idea and what fence might be appropriate to put around it.
Yeah. Okay. So I hadn't heard that section being mentioned. Not an insignificant thing.
No, not insignificant, and something we probably should try and get an answer to before we give it our blessing.
So the connectivity initiative, this is, I think, an upgrade of that to make it clear that the 100-100 standard is in there. And this is also where we define unserved and underserved. We've been using those terms, I think, with an understanding. So here, the department annually shall solicit proposals. This is how the department sort of does its measuring, I think, of who's covered.
I think this is the section, Chris, that puts all the language in for the department, and then it does it again for the new authority. Is that right, Maria? It's sort of
So these are, yes. So these are amendments to the existing connectivity initiative, the existing grant program. So this will be continue to be administered by the department until January 1st of next year. And yes, you're exactly right. The subsequent section shows the administration transferring to the new authority. But substantively, it would remain the same program as amended here.
Okay. Then there's an advisory board meant to, oh no, this already exists, right?
right.
Yeah.
And this was the one that you and I talked about, whether this continues to be necessary or if this seems duplicative. To me personally, it seemed duplicative.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It's deleted in my bill.
Yeah, I think it needs to. I think we should delete it. I don't understand what they still do.
There we go. So that was our concluding question. Still serve a function.
They hardly meet, frankly.
Right, and they're not. I mean, yeah. Okay, so we'll have to make that decision. Then there's this.
You don't see any objection to that, deleting that at this point?
I'd need to be convinced to keep them myself.
So we've charted a course, even though we haven't pulled the trigger yet. Okay.
This
I'm
is
writing it down, you guys.
Nice, good. This is an existing loan program that's getting looped into the broader goal here, I think. Maria, correct me if I'm misstating it. Oh, right. This is the Vita $4 million. Yes, and is the VITA loan program still relevant? I think it is because it's a revolving loan. In fact, we may want to think about some one-time money to them, but at a minimum, we've got to accept that they're around, right? And then I think this is the big money questions. Actually, I don't remember. Maria, what's going on here? Funding, section 12.
Section 12, let's see. Oh, so this is just clarifying. It wasn't entirely clear whether this was intended initially to be a revolving loan program. So the language here was intended to clarify that in fact it is. So the money that they're lending out, that they're authorized to lend out, the 10.8 million, they can continue to lend out indefinitely. So I believe.
So is that the VITA revolving
Yes.
loan or the authority's loan
This is
power?
the VITA's existing loan program.
Okay.
And there's no new money added to that loan program because
Correct.
we can't use ARPA. So it's just 10.8 that still revolves.
Yeah. Slowly revolving. Okay. Then this is where we make it clear about public records, that they're trade secrets for a while, I guess, right? This is where this section 16 is the property tax thing with the telecoms, or excuse me, with the co-ops. And this was my verbiage, Maria, but whether or not, we've all talked about this, right? So is it Washington Electric or WEC strings?
WEC, Washington Electric Co-op, it's WEC.
They string fiber basically for the CUDs, but they continue to own the fiber and they lend it to they lease it to the CUDs. And so,
that's one option. The other option is that the CUDs would own it and WEC would lease back some fiber to do its operations. I don't know if they've decided that, but one of those options is better for the two parties than the other. And I don't know which.
Yeah, I don't think,
Yep.
I think the whole point is to get the utilities interest rate. So they have to own it.
Okay, so
But,
those, right now, we're agnostic as to which route they take. It's probably the route that makes the most sense to them. Is that correct?
well, yeah. Well, the CUDs are already tax exempt. So it's only relevant in one direction, Senator. Anyway, so
They're not property tax exempt. Not necessarily, right?
no, they are, because they're municipalities.
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah.
So anyway, just a different way of wording it that maybe made it a little.
I didn't mean to interrupt you're on a roll, but I was trying to. Okay,
German.
continue.
Okay. So then this is the intersection with utilities. I'm not sure I don't fully understand it, but I assume it's just making sure they mesh, right? Maria?
That's right. Yep. Everything through section 20 or through
Yeah.
section 19 is all property tax related court conforming provisions.
And then we have the exciting workforce questions. And frankly, I don't know that they're worth it. Obviously there is a workforce problem as we look at all of this. Whether or not this is classic legislature, well, we addressed it with a study. I don't know, but so Commissioner of Labor shall conduct an occupational needs survey and find out that there's a lot of need. And then next year come back to us. Anyway, we can figure out if that section is necessary.
Yeah, it seemed like this was spending little pockets of money for not a lot of benefit, and it's underwhelming, but
Yeah, here comes 40 grand to VTC in consultation with the Department of Labor to establish an incumbent training program. I'm not sure what that means, but so anyway, I guess I mean it's smart to try to address the workforce issues. I'm just not convinced this is it. But that is where they're trying to do that. And then we get into ARPA money, the big numbers, 150 million, 30 million of that goes to the Community Broadband Fund. Which one is this? This is
that's the pre-construction money. And one of our questions, Maria, was does that 30 million include the 9 million that goes to DPS to begin with?
Yes.
Yes. So
Yes.
then there's 21 in pre-construction that would go to the
Remaining, yes.
Okay.
Yep, so anything that's left over from the 9 million that the department's authorized to spend would go to the authority.
Okay. And then
sorry, Chris.
No, you go ahead, please.
I was just going to say this 120 million would go to the grants. And it seems to me that we might need to change the name of that program because we can't loan it out. It can't be a subordinated debt program. We would have to separate that out because ARPA can't be used for that.
Well, ARPA might be able to use for loans, but it might not make the best use of money available to the state because repayments would have to go back to the Treasury.
Exactly. So
Right.
But one question that I've got about that, Maria, and we haven't seen the federal guidance yet, as to whether the guidance says that loans that are not paid back by the time the program ends have to go back. But the question is, can you revolve them while the program is in operation?
Right.
And it may be a reason that we might want to do that.
Yes, and I have that as a question to be looked into as soon as the guidance becomes available. That might give a little more clarity on that.
The other issue, of course, is there is that possibility, however remote, that there could be loans outside of ARPA. There could be money, rather, outside of ARPA that goes into this fund that has different rules associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned that somewhere, right? Because we might get infrastructure money that might be much more suitable for this. We don't know. So we also need to deal with the E911 shortfall. Maybe we need to deal with that. This puts the 0.4% on the universal service charge. You know, there's a lot of, we're going to have to get clear on that. And then there's this discrete $1 million grant, Northern Borders. That's part of the transfer, right? We already have that money.
Correct.
And then, I guess this is, yeah, this is where we maybe can say, unless infrastructure money can supplant this. So there's that. And then we just came up with a bunch of things we didn't see addressed anywhere that the committee's talked about. There's net neutrality as a guarantee. Is net neutrality baked into a CUD, Maria, or do we need to make that clear? If you want this money, blah, blah, blah.
It's not mentioned. It's
Well,
yeah.
They were created before we had a net neutrality problem.
I think we did. Well, there are different things now in terms of when you mean net neutrality. Do you mean neutral access, which is one thing, and net neutrality is something else?
I mean net neutrality when I mean it. Not neutral access is a separate question. Sarah Bray was talking about this the other day. I think that's much more problematic, frankly, for what we're trying to do here. But that's just my opinion.
Neutral access for in exchange for our advancing funds that could be used for this purpose. In other words, not loaning money to those who do not provide a benefit to the state, which would be the one control that we might have over things that are otherwise preempted. Net neutrality, I guess one question would be the extent to which we would run afoul of the federal preemptions against net neutrality generally.
Well,
I think we're allowed to buy services that we can condition. But sorry, Senator Schrock.
well, the case law so far in the Supreme Court has struck down that preemption issue at this point. There are still some remaining issues, but the question you asked, Chris, seems to assume that this is all going to be run through the CUDs. And if any money goes out to private entities or other companies, there's still a question, even if the CUDs are bound by net neutrality, as to whether we want to make that a condition of loan to other third parties.
Right, I think that goes along with the, do we have adequate guardrails question, Senator Sorokin, because we could add that as a guardrail, as a requirement for getting a grant.
Right.
If
Well,
we all agree.
You're not assuming at this point that we've made any decision just to go along with just working through the CUDs, are you?
We were not assuming that. We were trying to ask a bunch of questions. And I think that's one of the questions is, do we, that Senator Pearson mentioned earlier, do we provide an avenue for the community telcos or however we want to define it to get some money, or do they have to partner or contract with the CUDs in order to get it?
Okay.
Contracting would mean that they worked out their differences.
Well, they were
Would
under
it
a
not?
contract. Yes.
Okay. So in the event that that there's a failure to work out the differences, would we not need to define the default position?
Well, I think maybe, but I also think there's a separate question. I mean, to me, the money that goes through the CUDs is pretty straightforward. They can contract as they see fit. If they're signing a contract, they've obviously worked out the differences. You've got, though, also the Franklin telecoms, the Waitsfield telecoms, the Mansfield telecoms, where there's no CUD involved. There's no, and that's where we have talked about an entity like that is pledged or willing to commit, or I don't know how you lock them in, to universal coverage within the town they serve. I got no problem giving them money. There's no reason not to, in my opinion.
So if they have a contract with a CUD and it solves a local problem, there would be deference that there may be a way to get a grant that seals that deal, but if in the absence of such a cooperation, there cannot be grants for building out. Is that the situation, or correct?
No, because you keep bringing the CUD. The CUD takes care of that.
Yep.
The CUD gets the grant. They pay their contract partner. So I think the interplay is between the authority and the CUD in that case. And that's already kind of handled here.
Okay, so
but the Franklin Telecom, let's just pick them. There's not a CUD there. So, and they are an example of a community provider that is dedicated to universal coverage. And we'd have to say within your town or whatever, within your service area.
That's an area so far unresolved by this bill is
Yes.
unresolved in how there might be a default position for that sort of a situation.
It's less than unresolved. They are they're not part of this bill.
Okay.
And they, Briglin, as an example, said, you guys are going to want to think about this. And I think he's right.
And we need to answer that.
Well, an example is the fact, if you look at, discounting the RDF, OF and several other situations and other wireless projects, there are still about 10,000 addresses in Vermont that are not served by a CUD. So the CUDs are, if what we're looking for is filling in the blanks of universal access, or at least universal availability, unless you go broader than CUDs, you're not going to achieve that.
So I think,
or if you are going to go to those 12,000 addresses, you would go to them after you have gone to the underserved and unserved. Then you would worry about that.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I mean, if you take a look at a map as to where the CUDs are located, there are spots in Vermont where there is no CUD. Beyond that, there are places on the map that the CUDs theoretically cover, but as a practicality are very unlikely to ever go to, such as in Chittenden County. Because the assumption is that there's strong broadband either by legacy providers, by Burlington Telecom, or somebody else. So just take a look at that map, and a lot of it is, it's like drawing the map separating the nations in colonial Africa. There are lines on the map. They're not necessarily reality.
So that's not a question that we need to answer now. I'm not trying to answer the question. How would you record this discussion
broadband coverage in your notes? Is the bill.
Yeah,
that's the intent of the bill, is to get that. And what I'm suggesting is, if we solely limit it, and I think we've already discussed about these others, if we solely limit this to a CUD focus, we're going to miss the boat.
So we all agree.
Yeah. So what I was going to suggest, sorry, Chris Pearson.
Suggest, Senator.
Okay. I was going to suggest that, I think we all agree that there needs to be a little bit of a broadening out, that it can't just rely on the CUDs, but how do we do that with appropriate guardrails? Because we've been burned in the past and we don't want to be burned again. So
that's the question.
Yeah. So I was scrolling through the bill, and maybe Maria knows the page. I was trying to find the page where it has those conditions for receiving a grant. And I think it would be really helpful for all of us tonight to look at those conditions and figure out, are these guardrails, are these enough? These requirements for receiving funding, are they enough for both the CUDs and for potentially private telcos of some nature or another? And if they're not enough, do we want to prioritize them as Pearson and I talked about? Or do we want to add to them things like net neutrality, things like reporting, things like, who they have to work with, or universal coverage more? So I think that would be helpful, because that's really the heart of what we're talking about in terms of giving out money. Maybe, Senator Brock, you had some concerns about affordability. There could be better guardrails for that. And so I think if we all did that and came back and had a conversation just about that section and focused on it, it might help.
So that sounds like something that you will have in your notes, and that's what we should do.
And just to answer Senator Hardy's question, that section is section 8086, and it's on page 15 of the House bill. But let me just clarify something that I think will be important for you. In the House bill, these are funding priorities. So they're not requirements. The House made the policy choice, their money's going through the CUDs, and there's broad discretion in terms of them coming up with the solution that's best for their communities. And these are priorities to help the authority decide where the money should go and what, partnerships or projects that it supports. But I just want to highlight that, because I'm also hearing you talk about expanding it to go to other providers, for-profit providers. So that you might want to be more prescriptive and actually have requirements
Right.
and conditions. So I just want to highlight that issue.
Right. Thank you, Maria. That's a really good point, that these are just priorities. We can change that to make them so they're requirements, so that they're actual guardrails, boxes that have to be checked.
Right.
Yeah.
Our intention is to deal with them and not ignore that issue, and we haven't come up with a solution, and we're going to take a look at that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my
And
suggestion.
One note,
Are we-
it's
Are we in agreement?
semantic. Yes. And
Yes, okay.
I was thinking that, we
Thank
would
you,
call them
Senator Hart.
eligibility requirements.
Yeah.
Because it's not us screening them out, it's them making themselves eligible for funding.
Yeah, and that way, I would guess we do have broad power. Anyway, that's the highlight of the big questions. A few more have surfaced. We're nowhere closer to answers, but at least we have honed in on I think most of the big areas of question.
I wish the chair was able to been here to hear what you've worked on and what you have. We think we've got resolved and your help, and we will know when we meet again the areas that we have yet to tackle. So, is there any? I'm trying to, I'm chairing this. Is there anything that the committee wants to take up now after we've? What's the next thing on the agenda here?
Well, I think that there are perhaps a few other things that we will touch on at some point. We haven't dealt with the governance issue in any depth, and that we certainly can do on another day. We probably also at least ought to have a discussion on the scope or breadth of the agency, assuming we form another agency, as to whether or not it is solely limited to broadband or whether it looks at telecommunications more broadly. The third thing I think we ought to look at is the policy area. To what extent is this a policy-making organization, or is it solely a body that executes based on policy developed someplace else? And is that someplace else the Public Service Department? And here what I'm honing in on is the 10-year telecommunications plan. And that plan is not solely a broadband plan, it's a telecommunications plan. And as we look at what this authority, if we create one, is, that goes to the issue of what's its breadth. And although we are focusing on the priority of broadband, I have to come back to that notion that when we talk about telecommunication, we're talking about an evolving set of technologies that all tend to merge together and are very difficult to think about separately. We have now in the governor's ask a significant amount of money, I think it was 150 million, if I remember correctly, devoted to mobile communications, cellular. Should we leave that solely with the Public Service Department, or should we integrate it with whatever it is we're creating here? So we look at telecommunications. And then lastly, that leads us to the issue of policy versus execution. Do we leave the planning in the hands of another organization that may develop something that this organization and its expertise thinks is crazy? Or do we integrate planning in terms of and strategy forming in what we do? Because in my mind, it's an integral way to get to the end result that we're mandating. And that is a discussion that we probably will not have in the next minute and a half.
So one moment, Senator Bray, just so Senator, we have no 10-year telecommunication plan. And if we had one, we would not be meeting today. We have set a priority for served and unserved areas with fiber. And I don't know how long it will take for a 10-year communication plan to be developed.
Well, supposedly one is to be developed and delivered by July.
Right.
Now, the question is, do we take that plan?
I'm not depending on the food in my pantry to keep me going after July. So if there is no plan.
Well,
so
we paid for a plan. I'll put it that way. At least we contracted for a plan.
So we're putting forth what we wish to have started first, and we need a plan in order to come up with what's going to happen next. And when we come up with that, Senator Brock is asking the questions that need to be answered in that plan. And I don't know what we're going to add to that this afternoon. Senator Bray.
So I always think of policy as being the legislature's domain, but that our challenges we're not expert enough. So whether it's that telecom plan or the department speaking to us or the newly formed board speaking to us, I would think all these things would come back to us. Policy would get set at the legislative level, appropriations, and then it would flow back out. Otherwise, it seems like we're over. That would feel to me like otherwise over delegation.
Well, I think we've been over delegated to try and fill in the what do we start doing tomorrow, and we're doing it because we have no choice. And when the BTA or whatever is created and they come back with a plan, we'll endorse it, modify it, or grant them the authority to implement it.
Well, what we have to go right now is we've got a requirement for a 10-year telecommunications plan. And it seems to me that as part of what we do here, we're going to decide who does that. You know, if we have a plan that's done by the department that comes out in July, and then we're looking for the telecommunications authority to create a plan, what if the two conflict? Shouldn't they come together? Otherwise, it's bedlam unless we decide these things.
I believe what you say is true. Senator Hardy.
Thank you. So I would agree with Senator Bray, and I think that this authority, in order to get its work done and to implement broadband broadly across our state, we wanted to stay focused on the implementation of that, and that we make the broad policy. They decide the sort of the decisions in the weeds about the funding, and the department is doing a telecom plan that's supposed to come out in June. So we will have a plan. So I don't think we need to ask this authority to make a plan as well. The 10-year telecom plan will already have been done, and this authority needs to stay focused on its work. So I would say an execution agency, not a planning or a policy agency, that really we want them to execute broadband and get that job done, so we don't continue to have this deja vu conversation over and over again.
One thing that I would ask the members of the committee to think about is, based on our past history of the department creating a plan, that we have essentially the discount plan being created right now, based on the amount of funding compared with the funding that we had heard that was necessary when we looked at this last year. They come out with a plan, and then that plan gets delivered to this entity that's managing broadband. What if the two conflict and are incompatible one with the other? What does the agency do?
That's a question we have to answer, and we can speculate that once they've delivered the plan and the VTA is created, then it will be in the hands of the VTA to bring that plan to us. But I don't know what the answer is. We need to answer that question. Senator Bray.
I would say anybody's plans should come to us, and the VTA, the new VTA, should be reporting out. So for instance, their reports back to us may highlight conflicts with or things they would want to, they might agree or disagree with the plan, but I would think their sort of, their feedback would come to us, and we'd end up sorting out what the choice would be and then shipping new orders back out.
So that looks like the future. I want to wrap up today, and I think Senators Hardy and Pearson did us a service. The person whose name we'd never mention anymore, assembled a printout entitled Broadband Telecommunications Strategy Task Force, which also lays out some thoughts that many of which we've touched on today, and others of which we haven't got to yet, and maybe the telecom plan will get to them, or the new authority will get to them, but they are worth a read. It's a relatively short, and they're in bullets. So,
right.
If Senator Bray?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking back to my time on the VTA. I think one of the challenges was exactly what Senator Brock's bringing up now, like who's plan, who's managing, who's implementing, and so I think if I sound a little adamant about having everything to come back to us, one, I just think that's where we're the policymakers anyway, but it's in the end, I would say we own this responsibility on behalf of the people we're serving. And the last time, I don't think the legislature necessarily controlled the actors, as this is just my memory of it. So, or my experience of it. So I think I'm trying to have us hold the thing and arbitrate between different points of view, and then, as I said, sort of bluntly issue the orders for what happens. Because otherwise, I'm afraid we'll have, and if in a way we're not ideal for it because we go home, but I was talking to the pro tem about things, especially this year, that are going to be happening between May and January. And I know that, for Senate Natural, we were talking about having an authorized committee day again to look at something. So maybe after that plan, we end up gathering for a day or, half a day or whatever, and evaluating that plan before it becomes a blueprint for a new VTA or something. I don't know.
So we're taking the first step here, and we're going to stop today, and we're going to, my goodness, we got to finish with Lexington, Concord, and the Battle of Bunker Hill before we deal with the rest of the war here. Senator Hardy, anything before we adjourn?
Yeah, I was just going to say, whatever the plan is, we make the laws, and the laws are above the plan. So if they come out with a plan that conflicts with the things that we put in this bill, then the law would presumably, and I defer to Maria, but the law would govern, not the plan.
Right. And at this point, who knows what that request for the plan was compared to what we're talking about.
I think you're absolutely right, Senator Hardy. The only little nuanced area, I might say, there are, some provisions in statute. I'm thinking of the Consolidated Incentive Regulation Plan. I think, that's looked at, whether it's consistent with the state's telecom plan. So to the extent that you don't make any changes in the interim, that there might be statutes that reference the plan as guidance so I would have to look at all those sections, but.
Okay, so we've gone as far as we're going to go today, and I wish the chair was here to have listened to the presentation and the discussion around it. But
right.
She's not, and we'll take it up again tomorrow. Senator Bray, are you waving goodbye?
No, I'm not waving goodbye. I've learned when I hear you say something like that, I go, I move that we adjourn.
We are adjourned.